Today's council meeting. I'll just open with karakia. Kia tau mai te maramatanga, kia tau mai te rangimārie e, kia tau mai te kaha me te aroha mō tēnei kaupapa, hui e, taiki e. Welcome to this deliberations meeting. Again, we've got a mix of in the chambers and on Zoom. So we'll just work our way through that. Hopefully the technology will all work according to plan. Are there any apologies that we have received? If not, Councillor Tufnell is an apology. Yeah. Thank you. Moved Councillor Bryant, seconded Councillor Mailing. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Declarations of interest. There are none. Resolution to accept the late agenda item. So it's noted there in terms of what it is, what it covers. Someone prepared to move the receipt of that? Councillor McKenzie, seconded Councillor Dowler. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Alan, over Dwayne, Sandra, one of you. Sandra, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll take my report as read. We received a total of 15 submissions on the scheduled fees and charges as per attachment 1 on various submission points. These submission points are outlined under 4.2 of my report, along with staff comments and recommendations. There is also a further recommendation by staff to remove the notice to fixed charge and building insurance under 4.3 of this report. You heard one submitter, Anthea Garney, on behalf of Bingo Skip Hire Motueka at the combined hearing with the annual plan on 18th of May, and you requested additional information on the waste management charges. This extra information is contained within the addendum report under point 6 of that report. Staff are available to answer any questions on these recommendations.
And through Mr. Mayor, just to note a couple of tweaks to the draft resolutions. They don't change the substance at all. The draft resolutions are, the substance of them is the same. We've just changed the formatting of resolution 2 to be clear about the removal of those two charges there, and just noting that you'll in fact, the final schedule on charges will come back to you in June for a final adoption at that point.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne. It's open for questions. Councillor Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Sandra, just in relation to the adult members, will that mean there will now be no fines for overdue books?
That's correct.
And just in relation to the Federated Farmers submission and the minimum charge for a resource consent application, of $42, where have we landed on that? We're still looking to pursue that.
Staff recommendation is to retain.
Right, because as I understand it from reading them, is that's the minimum, that segment that we charge in 15 minutes is $42 there. So I guess other than that, you'd have to do 15 minutes for free, wouldn't you? Dennis has got his hand up.
Dennis?
Yes, councillors, what you also need to be aware of, it's the minimum that we apply both in terms of refund and charging. So, you know, if the extra costs are less than $42, we will not invoice someone for the extra. Equally, if it's less than the $42, we won't give them a refund. And it's at the lower end. Some councils, you know, will not give people a refund if it's $100 difference. So I think we've hit the balance about right.
Yeah, I think that probably could have been made clearer in the information that it works both ways, because the focus was all on us not providing refunds. But if we're also not charging if it overruns by the same amount, that at least provides some balance. But that either wasn't clear or certainly wasn't picked up through the.
We did make that clear to the media, but they didn't pick it up.
Thank you, Dennis. Councillor McKenzie, then Councillor Dowler.
Thank you. Just an admin point. Could I be clear which document we're in, and then when I know which document, which page we're at, because I'm not finding it like that.
Page 81 for the.
Yeah, page 81. draft schedule fees and charges. And then there are a number of points related to the key submissions. Okay, thank you, Councillor Dowler.
Yeah, just the notice to fix. I'm a bit bewildered about that because I've got a page here on number 182. It says notice to fix. It's got all sorts of fees there to do with buildings and stuff like that that are $130 and $1,000 and stuff like that. So am I reading that wrong?
Yes, so the only change we are recommending is that when a notice to fix is issued on a person who has a non-compliant building, and we've tried to negotiate them to fix it up in order to achieve compliance, we will get to the point where if they don't do that, we will serve a notice to fix. That has an administrative charge of $500 and whatever dollars it is, and that goes at the same time as we issue the notice to fix. What we're recommending is that fee is removed from the schedule. So it'll be treated just like an abatement notice under the Resource Management Act. If someone has to receive a notice of that sort, they will just receive the notice. They won't receive the administration charge. Abatement notices don't have an administration charge with them, so we're trying to treat them in the same because their regulatory effect is similar. If for any reason there is a punitive financial element necessary, the council always has recourse to infringement fines, and that's a different system again. But yeah, the only change that we're actually suggesting here is that if a notice to fix is issued, we will not accompany that with an administration charge. And as you saw from the report, we don't issue lots of them in any one year, and we'd only be foregoing $8,000 or something of that order.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hill and then Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the $42 refund or not charging, can I just have clarified, please, what that relates to? What type of fee that relates to?
So that relates to any charge that is incurred in the processing of resource consents or dealing with other charges where the staff hourly rate of $170 under this proposal is applied to a processing effort. So it could actually be objections or other processing details under the Resource Management Act.
So yes, thank you. So not just resource consent. So
no, that's correct.
And what's if I think about a staff member processing this, going through the motions of whatever they do to charge or invoice, that's somebody working away. Are there any other costs involved?
No additional costs, because as you say, the staff have to keep their job sheets updated. They have to monitor the time spent against a particular job, and then the administration staff total all that up, see whether or not it is covered by the deposit that has been paid, and if it has been, then and it's less than $42, then no further invoices is sent. If it's more than $42 and the charge is done for less than the deposit, we'll give them a refund. If the effort required exceeds the deposit, and in most cases recently it has been, then we will send an extra invoice out. So that's why we have also recommended, as part of the changes to the fees and charges schedule, to actually lift the deposit level so we can actually try and reduce the administrative burden of having to do subsequent invoicing.
Thank you, Dennis. And have we got any idea of how many invoices or charges that we don't do because of the $42? Do we have that as a sort of, do we keep a track of that as a percentage or just as a, you know?
No, but equally we don't keep track of the charges the other way around either. So I think when the admin staff total up all the costs, and if it's within that $42.50, either plus or minus, then they don't send an invoice. They don't have to worry about it. So only if it goes beyond that level do we actually give the refund or invoice the additional cost. The hope is that by lifting the deposit level, we will actually reduce the number of invoices either way, or the number of refunds that we, well, probably unlikely to be issuing refunds at a higher deposit level. But yeah, we'll be reducing the additional invoices.
It's helpful to know that it'll have that impact. $42 is a lot of money to some people, or it's an amount of money that's that they care about. And I understand the rationale for it. I don't know about somebody who's owed $40 being satisfied that someone else isn't getting charged $40 at some other point. I don't, it rounds out for council, but it doesn't round out for the applicants. So I'm not so, I don't know, I feel like that there'll be ways in which the organisation sucks up costs, small costs here and there. And this is an area that I feel a bit uncomfortable about. I'd prefer that we suck up the cost of processing if it's staff time. That's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just a query about, well, it's not a query, it's a comment as well about the waste management fee and fee rises. And it is the commercial operators who have submitted to us. And so these commercial operators, they are actually picking up rubbish and taking it for disposal, aren't they? What actually are is that what these commercial operators are assumed to be by
yeah,
by
unfortunately we've got
expression?
David Stevenson here to answer any curly questions, but in short, yes, the commercial operators pick up waste at your curb or from commercial customers, and they can take it to the resource recovery centre, and for the larger ones they can take it directly to York Valley landfill. David, do you want to add that?
Yeah. And so they will have to pass on these costs to their customers. Do you think there's a risk that they're actually going to not be financially viable? I mean, I know that it's not our role to support them, but I'm just aware that these changes could actually have, quite a major effect on these businesses. And is that desirable?
Through the chair. Historically, they've just passed those charges on. There's always a bit of competition between the players on who moves first on that. But by and large, those, particularly for the large commercial contracts that they hold, it's straight, as far as I understand, it's just a straight pass-through charge. That cost just passes through to the ultimate customer. On the domestic front, there is a bit of, they often offer a 12-month contract, but we signal well in advance of those changes so they can build that into their long-term contracts.
Right. So we'll just have to see how that plays out in that field of business.
But through the chair, I might just ask a question of David. David, I understand that our charges are still low compared to other places of the country, and there are commercial operators operating viably in places like Auckland and things like that.
Yeah, we're from memory, last time I looked, we're in the sort of the bottom third of the spread across the country in terms of disposal charges.
That would actually be quite interesting information for us to have. I mean, this is one of the key things that we need to, like, it's nice that you brought it up today. It actually would have been really good to have it in the explanation. So whether it's rates or charges, I mean, obviously water we're probably at the other end of the spectrum. But understanding the range that exists across the country, whether it's dog registration fees or in this case, waste disposal fees, is just good information to have these conversations with members of the public. I used Bingo Skip Hire some months ago, and I got a nice email very pointedly pointing out to their customers, of which I have one, or was one, who's put the price up and who to, and that they don't have a choice, and that, the council has put the fees up, and therefore, but I think most people who utilise their services are going to continue to utilise their services and are not going to blame them for the increase in cost. They will look to us. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I just want to comment on the overdue fines for adult users of the library. I think it's great to see that we are dispensing with that, and I thank the staff for giving that good consideration and recommending it. I just want to come back to the point that Councillor Hills raised around the refunds. So I've got a couple of questions about it. Firstly, previously to this decision, were we refunding everything? That's my first question.
The figure then, a bit before this, is $20. Yeah, $20.
$20, okay. And then when it says in the report that when benchmarking the proposed limit, it was similar to or lower than the level set by many other councils. So, I mean, of the 70 odd councils across New Zealand, how many of those 70 actually have a policy to not refund? So, you know, I just don't get a sense from this report how big our body of knowledge is about councils across the country. So the benchmarking, how many councils were involved in that?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to actually get that information. When I was talking to the staff, you know, I can remember Queenstown and Selwyn don't refund if it's $100. So we were in the sort of lower quartile of charges for those councils who have this policy, and I'm pretty sure that there are some councils who don't have a policy. You know, they'll give you the refund even if it's 10 cents. I presume. I don't know. But if you wanted me to find that out, I'd have to go and do some more research.
No, I don't want any more work done. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I can totally understand the decision not to invoice for a small amount. That makes complete sense. But, you know, kind of when you've got somebody else's money and you don't give it back, that's sort of a different matter, actually. But given that we've already had the policy in place for $20, that's okay, just thinking about it.
The historical explanation, and is Mike here? Initially, the figure was set to someone calculated how much it cost to raise an invoice going through the system. You know, everyone who pushed the button, and it came out of that, whatever the figure was in those days. And now I'm being told that the figure is $42.
Well, you know,
I guess that's one
2
of the
blocks of cheese, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess that's one of that is one of the most fascinating things about this conversation. Actually, you would have thought with everything that we have in technology that invoicing would have dropped in price over time. Like, it doesn't seem that it should have doubled, but you know, this is one of the, I guess, ironies of our investment in technology, and everyone, you know, instead of everything going out by snail mail and someone delivering it, and somehow it's got more expensive to do invoicing, which seems weird. Councillor Ogilvie, Councillor Walker and Councillor Tilley.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Coming back to the waste management fee, does that affect our own recycling rate or not?
David.
Through the chair, not directly, only to the contamination charge. So around 7.5% of our recycling is contaminated. So we do pay the increased disposal cost for that contamination.
So our recycling rate was about 135 at present, is going up to what figure?
Yeah, it is increasing, but there's other reasons behind that increase. That
Right.
contamination disposal cost is in the order of 30,000 per annum. So it's not a significant cost.
Okay, so what support from the general rate goes into the sort of activity that Mingo and other commercial operators have?
So through the chair, this year it's around, I'll just look at my numbers here. $285K
285,000
from the general rate into the waste management
into
Right.
resource recovery operations. Yes.
Right. And finally, we talked about our rate being lower than others. How does it compare with the rate for Nelson and even for Marlborough, for example, rather than the whole country?
Sorry, I'll just correct my earlier answer. It's more in the order of 700,000 this year, but there's a reduction of 285k. So the LTP anticipated a reduction
Yes.
of 285 this year in the general rate, and forecasting another reduction of 300k next year in the general rate component.
So just to be clear, the general rate contribution, and it is into the resource recovery as opposed to the waste disposal.
It's into the operational, the non-recycling waste operations, which is the resource recovery centres, which include waste disposal and recycling drop-off and all those other activities like green waste and hard fill.
So the increase in disposal fees, as is mentioned in the report, is offsetting reducing the general rate contribution into the same, which is part of our policy to move towards a cost recovery from that activity as opposed to continuing to put in $700,000 a year from general rate.
Correct. There's a 15% increase from the landfill, and we're passing that through, and we're passing another 5% increase through to reduce that general rate requirement for the activity.
Yeah, thank you.
And is that in accord to the activity management plan?
Yes,
discussed?
that's correct.
And the long-term plan?
Yes, that was signalled in the LTP and
Right.
the activity management plan.
So does that make it equal now? Will there be a further charge increase in 2023-24 or not?
We can't know exactly where the charges will go next year. We do know where the government's waste disposal levy is going, which is increasing again. But the landfill business unit will be looking at their ETS liabilities and capital cost depreciation. Okay. So that's still a work in progress. There might be a bit of relief on the ETS component because the gas collection is getting a lot better at the landfill, but they'll be working that through in the next 6 months for preparing next year's.
Right. And the final question, David, in terms of there's a change in Mariri coming up from July the 1st, I think, from volumetric to weight. What impact will that have on ordinary people, first of all, and secondly on commercial operators?
Through the chair, so in theory it shouldn't have any impact because a volumetric measure should be the equivalent of the weight-based measure. The problem is that it's based on a judgment call by staff. So all I can say is that when you pay by weight, you'll pay exactly what you should pay. There's no unders and overs with that. So on any particular person, it might change. If you bring, for want of a better term, light fluffy waste to the transfer station, then you will pay less. If you bring well compacted, really heavy waste, then you'll probably pay more.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I presume you can hear me. I just wanted to raise just a couple of points with regards to the waste management and the submission that we got from Bingo Skip. And so clearly this is a business that they've taken on relatively recently. And I guess I hear some of her pains when she says in July last year, the fees went up 17%, and now this year they're going up 20%. Is this going to just be continuously increasing every year? Like, at what point do we go, this is not actually sustainable, and the onward flow that would have if we didn't have those commercial operators within our communities?
So through the chair, the activity management plan forecasts one further increase next year and then a flattening off of disposal increases. So beyond an increase next year, the forecast is for flat disposal prices with inflation only.
And at what point can we fully educate these commercial providers of what the increase next year is going to be? Because I guess, you know, the mayor said that he got a letter. I guess that's just going to be the thing that they have to do, is to write letters to all of their customers and being pre-warned, prepared that the cost is just going to keep going up and up.
So we can certainly point them to the activity management plan, which has those proposed fee increases in them. We do our best to communicate as early as we can. So we typically give operators a heads up in December or January of where things are going with the activity management plan, and the landfill business units reports and agendas are open public documents, and they're normally in October, well prior to the increase. So there's certainly public information out there, but we can do more to just make those commercial operators aware of it.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So out of interest, what is the proposal in the long-term plan for the increase next year?
It's around another in the order of 17–18% again. And a lot of that's driven by the further increase in the waste disposal cost from central government.
Okay, thanks, David. Councillor Turley.
Thank you. Yes, I'm just a little bit from a consumer's point of view, thinking along the lines that, you drop the overdue library charges for adults, and you pocket the $40 for the other charge rather than returning it. It just doesn't seem quite fair to me. So, yeah, I think we could have done better than that and just left that $40 at the $20, which is the halfway mark. Bearing in mind that a lot of our community are on low wages and with the costs of COVID at the moment and things like that. So that would be where I would sit.
So I'll just make it clear, the council could choose to do that. We're in deliberations. That is the point. The recommendation is $48. We've had submissions. Today's discussion / deliberation is there to decide precisely whether we wish to go with the $48 as suggested for the rationale as explained by Dennis, or whether you want to stick at $20 and understand the implications of that. So that's why we're here. So when you're thinking about the resolution, that is our role. Thank you, Councillor Turley. Right, is there anything else on the schedule? Councillor Bryan?
So, yeah, just two things if I may, Mr. Mayor. It was a deliberate decision of the landfill business unit to spread those charges, particularly relating to the landfill, over 2 years, so there was less of an impact in 1 year. And unfortunately, with a landfill, there always seems to be charges coming at you for remediation or stuff like that to meet environmental concerns or resource consent conditions. But hopefully as they work through that, they may get less over time. But of course, there's also the ongoing issue of the waste levy that has to be paid each year to come back to the councils. So it's a bit of a circular thing. The other question I have for Sandra particularly is, Sandra, we have the charges for the Collingwood motor camp in here. One time we used to have the others, and particularly Murchison. What's the reason we don't have the other charges in here now? Or is that just, I'm hoping it's not an oversight. Well, Susan's indicated.
Susan?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Drummond might be able to answer this, but my understanding is it's probably because the Murchison one and the Motueka ones are leased, whereas the Collingwood one is a council owned and run facility. So I expect that is why, but if Mr. Drummond is available to answer and clarify that, that would be helpful.
It would be just good to clarify because we don't want to mistakenly not put it in there, because I have had people ask about the charges.
Okay, thank you.
So,
yep.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that is correct. The Collingwood Park is directly owned and operated by council. We set the charges for that. Riverside and Murchison, Motueka Top 10, Pahara Top 10, they are all leased. They set their own charges and we receive a share of the income.
Thanks, Mike. Councillor Hill. And we still need, I think we still need someone to move the resolution or a resolution. Councillor Hill.
Just wondering, thank you, Chair. Just wondering about the increase in gravel extraction charges. What the rationale is there?
Who's answering that question? Dennis.
I think they're just CPI movements, but I'll stand to be corrected on that.
Thank you. Just a big shift in the price of dumping a fridge. $7 to $22.50. There must be something going on there with disposing of something in the fridge.
David.
Just bear with me for a minute. I'll just check that.
Right, so we're just, David's just checking in relation. So is someone willing to move a resolution, whether it's the one contained within the agenda or another one, a variation thereof?
I'm happy to move the one on the agenda.
Okay, as amended / altered. So it's moved Councillor Bryant, seconded Councillor Ogilvie. Dennis.
I just had a chat to the incoming group manager. We'd be happy to forego the additional $22 and just stick with the current $20 if you're happy with that in relation to invoicing, not paying refunds, sorry.
Okay, so I'm somewhat surprised that someone didn't move that, Dennis, given the conversation we had, but thank you for the offer, having picked up the reading the room, which is good from both of you. So, well, I've got a mover and seconder, so I'll ask them if they're happy to have the resolution amended to reflect that. So from what I took from Dennis, that would mean we would refund above $20, so not move it to 48. But I think what I took from that is, but we would not send out bills to people up to 48. Is that what you're suggesting? 42, sorry. So 42 would be, we would not send them out, but we wouldn't, we would refund above 20 as opposed to 42. Okay, everyone clear what that means?
I just have one question. Have we any idea when the order of what likely cost that would be? Is it like $1,000?
I think, out of 1,000 consents a year, I'm not too sure, but it would be under 100, I'm sure. So, you're only talking about $2,000.
Yeah. In the overall scheme of things, it's insignificant. Yeah, no, happy with that.
Often the way with the things that get up people's nose, they seem insignificant, but they can just be annoying. So thank you for the offer, Dennis and Kim. So the resolution is amended to reflect that. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Just on the waste thing, I think it's important that the submission was partly about the cost, but it was also about ensuring that we reduce the overall amount. So there is a huge amount of focus on recycling, reuse, and disposal. Where we still seem, in my view, to be way behind the 8 ball is in reduction. So, and I think the submitter, in her very passionate submission, did say that is where. So what we're doing is using a tool, which is cost, to try and drive reduction or a move to recycling. However, that is not the best tool, because we know that it can result in people just chucking stuff over the bank. And rather like at the moment, things like registrations and warrants, people are looking in their household budgets for the things they don't want to pay for because everyone's under pressure. And if the cost is, seen as a barrier, we will get it left at the Salvation Army store or left outside the recycling bins, clothing bins. We'll get it dumped on the riverbanks, and we will cover that in the general rate cost. So we have to remain very cognizant of the impact of these decisions. But I think the key thing is we need to keep driving the stewardship conversations. And I don't know if you've got an update, David, on where that's all at. But there's been a lot of talk about shifting the cost to the point of purchase. So whether that's tyres, whether that's fridges, whether that's any of the many other things that end up arriving on our doorstep to dispose of. But as yet, either that hasn't got that far, or it's clearly not being promoted enough. So, do you just give us an update on where we're at with the reduction stuff, David?
First up on the so on product stewardship, so tyres and refrigerant gases are making really good progress. So regulations have been drafted, I believe, now for tyres. So that'll be the first cab off the rank, that there'll no longer be a cost to dispose of your tyre. There'll be an extra cost when you buy a tyre, and you'll be able to drop it at the shop or wherever free of charge. So that will be all covered by industry. Closely following that is refrigerant gases from fridges and the like. That's one of the costs that we absorb at the moment, is removing refrigerant gases from those fridges. So that's closely following behind. Government's also looking at something which is smaller, which is your container deposit, which is whether or not you should get money back for your bottles and things. Next on the list is plastic, agrochemical containers, and a few other things that are problematic for us. On the fridges, so the proposal is to charge by weight at most sites rather than by unit. That makes it easier and fairer. And there may be an error in my calculations for $22.50, so I would recommend $12.50 for the fridges.
Okay, so do we need to note that in the resolution as well? So do you want to add a D? Thank you. So yeah, I'll come to you, Councillor Mailing. Thanks for that, David. I think it's still pretty underwhelming, to be honest. Like there's so much. I think of all the changes in the legislation that's being smashed through, and all the things that are controversial and difficult. I don't think there's anything controversial about shifting the cost and reducing waste so that we don't have to face the challenge of how to dispose of it, how to pay for it. And yet it seems a million miles behind. I think we've been discussing it for years, and it's just disappointing that what seem relatively minor things don't really even hit on the major issues around packaging, a huge amount of which is what we end up disposing of, which is stuff that's wrapped around stuff that didn't need it in the first place. So again, I think as part of our role in continuing to advocate strongly to ensure that those stewardship-related discussions move on somewhat quicker than they have been in the past. Councillor Walker and Councillor Mailing, and then I'll put the resolution once it's finalised.
Yeah, sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Could you just tell me, what was that fridge disposal cost going to be moved to?
It's going to drop from $22.50 to $12.50.
Cool, thank you. Because I'm consciously aware that, so if I'm a beneficiary and I go to MSD, I can get a whiteware assistance. If my fridge was to die, they would replace my fridge. But you know, there is nothing in that system that then takes my dud fridge away. And we currently have them being stored in community and backyards, highly, questionable around the safety when it comes to other children playing. And if we were to do it at 26, we're going to have more of that behaviour continuing. So thank you for whoever's managed to get that price brought down.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Mailing, and then I'll put the resolution unless the mover wants to write a reply.
Yeah, just another question, Mr. Stevenson. When we worked on the joint waste minimisation committee, we talked about working with the building industry because a significant amount of our volume going to landfill is actually through construction. And when I look at figures through the FDS, we're building roughly 550 houses a year, and Nelson's doing close to 300 now, 250. So that's a significant amount. Have you had any progress with industry in that area in the last 2 years?
Really struggling, to be honest. Hard to know exactly why. Sometimes it's a small overall cost in the build for them. Paying for 3 or 4 skips, it will just get passed on to the owner, and there's not really a lot in it to them, to be honest. In terms of demolition, again, we've tried to engage with people, and we're trying more and more to engage early on when we know the subdivisions are occurring to get that idea. But again, speed is probably what they're more interested in than looking to deconstruct or to demolish. We're still working on it. We've had a little bit of success, and we'll try and focus on our own capital projects rather than other people's. I think that's probably one of the things we need to focus on is if we can do it with our work, then maybe we can show others can do it in theirs.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mailing. Councillor Butler-Brewery, Whalley.
Yeah, sorry, very quickly. I'm aware, you know, we're looking at intensification, and there's quite a few properties owned by council, and so if these properties are demolished, is there a possibility that that there can be some control over what happens to those materials and how they're disposed of?
I think that's David just indicated that, yeah, we need to demonstrate if we are doing our own jobs, then we need to manage it in the way that we're expecting other people to.
Right. Yeah, I just want to.
The resolution's been moved and seconded as amended with those changes. So I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. So we'll move back to the annual plan deliberations, and I'll come over to Alan to introduce that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I just have one minor correction to begin with. So on paragraph 5.2, the pie chart, I got the data labels the wrong way around. So that large segment with 25 on it, those were the people who preferred option 2, and the smaller segment with a 4 on it, they were the people who preferred option 1. So just the labels the wrong way around on the chart. So just like to correct that. With that said, I'll take the report as read. We have got an updated resolution 18. So this is about the Golden Bay Grandstand funding. So if Tara could bring that up. That just really recognises the 18. That just recognises the decision that you made at the council meeting last week, which obviously happened since we wrote the report. There we are. So it just recognises that, yeah, you made some decisions on funding the grandstand from the Golden Bay Reserve financial contributions last week. And then with the Mayor's permission, I suggest we sort of work through the report and the issues in it in a sort of staged approach. So dealing initially with the options and then moving through the other issues that have been raised by submitters and staff. On a point-by-point basis. You happy to do that? Okay.
If you're happy to take that approach.
Okay. So initially starting with the sort of the broad options. So if you remember in the consultation document, we had 2 options that we made available to people. So a program which was option 1, which was pretty much the full program that we had in year 2 of the LTP, but with additional costs on top of that, which had a rates revenue increase of 7.66%. And then we had the option 2, where we had made some considerable savings, so reducing the program and reducing the rates revenue to the 5.51%. So as you see, the majority of the submitters, so 24 written plus the 1 audio submitter, preferred option 2, and we had a few people who preferred option 1. Obviously, there were several people who raised other issues or didn't specifically note their preference on the options. The table in paragraph 5.3 summarises the different sort of points made by submitters in relation to those programs and rates revenue increases. We did have 2 submitters that suggested sort of hybrid options. So they both were suggesting that we didn't defer the essential capital and maintenance expenditure in option 2, but did defer the digital innovation program and the consultant and reduce the consultancy budgets. So given the option 2 was the council's preferred option, and the feedback we've got from submitters, recommendation is to proceed with option 2, but just recognising that any decisions you make later in the meetings that affect rates, potentially change that 5.51% rates increase.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So just in terms of the high level or kind of initial decisions, notwithstanding Alan's last point, that decisions we might make on the items listed further on, are people generally supportive of aiming at option 2, i.e. the 5.51? I'm not getting any indications otherwise. Councillor Hill, do you wish to speak to that item?
To say that yes, I do support that. I do have a question if I can. I'm just wondering, just thinking about the zero increase that we had for the COVID, through that initial COVID period. I'm just wondering what the impacts are still from that in terms of rippling through to where we are now. I know that's a bit vague, but I'm aware that there's a nice piece in the report about what would be the impact of a 0% increase now. And reading that, I was thinking, well, we did have a 0% increase, and I'm just wondering about how much is carried over. The impact that carries on. It has to be paid for or work done at some point, and just wondering what the impact of that is on what we're looking at today in our 5.5.
Is anyone in a position to answer that? I guess it will, by necessity, be relatively general as opposed to specific. But Alan,
yeah, at a very general level, from Mr. Mayor, from my point of view, I think there is still an impact. As you say, it's probably very hard to quantify that at this point.
Mike, do you have anything to add? Drummond, that is.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Probably not a lot. I mean, it would be difficult to unwind and identify exactly how the impacts of that reduction in rates to 0% have flowed through, because it was partly achieved through capital works programs, partly achieved through cost containment, and partly achieved through deferring work. And so, as Councillor Hill has quite rightly pointed out, deferring work simply moves the costs into another year. And so that's probably all I could say about the impact. It's not possible to pull it out from all the other factors that have impacted the proposed annual plan budget.
Thank you. I think it's helpful just to note that, it's a helpful note, isn't it, that we are still catching up from the zero. And yeah, I don't know if we've put that in explicitly anywhere, but for me, it's a factor, really. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hill. So I'll just take, in terms of, I don't think we need to make a decision in relation specifically to that, because it will be picked up through the subsequent decision making and resolutions. But in terms of the starting point, we are all on the same page in terms of the 5.51. So with that, Alan, if you'd like to move on to the next discussion.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So moving then on to better off funding. So in the consultation document, we indicated that we would consider whether we could use, or we should use, some of the better off funding from Three Waters to help offset the significant increase in water rates in the annual plan. So it's, yes, I think something the council needs to consider further now. Since that time, we have had a workshop on the better off funding, and we probably know a little bit more about the funding and the process than we did at the time. Certainly, one of the issues we have is that we won't know by the 30th of June whether, if council was going down this track, we wouldn't know by the 30th of June whether the government were accepting that and were prepared to make the better off funding available for that purpose. So that means if you wanted to proceed down that track, there's a risk that that the funding doesn't come through from central government, and you effectively have a revenue gap or revenue deficit from that. For that reason, staff recommend not making that assumption, not assuming that some of the water rates, or I think we're looking at water services Act costs could be funded through Better Off funding. And so, yeah, suggest that we don't go down that track.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Open for discussion, conversation. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just post the workshop we had the other day, and particularly in relation to your comments, I did give it some further thought, and there is going to be quite a hard hit on urban water users through the water charges. And I'm just wondering, even if it's a little bit of a process to get there, and in the following year, we should actually look at that to try and reduce the impact of those water changes coming through. I'm talking about the Better Off funding. Just wondered if any thought given to how we could do that.
Yeah, through the chair. So, I mean, mechanically, the way you'd do it is you'd make an assumption that you're going to get Better Off funding, and you'd make an assumption that in the annual plan along those lines, a sum, say, let's say it's $200,000 or $300,000 in the forthcoming financial year, and it would be lock it in. It's an assumption, and the rate would be struck accordingly. The risk you run is that you ultimately are unsuccessful, they don't agree to that, or iwi Māori do not show support for that, and you change your mind in between now and then.
Subsequent year.
Oh, in the subsequent year, sorry, I'll get to that in a moment. And then the account will run a deficit. What that means for the subsequent year is that you have to climb back up not only the change coming for next year, but also recover the deficit for this year. So you'll get a double or triple whammy next year in terms of the water rates.
Could you use Better Off in 2020?
If you're going to go down that route, it would make sense to consider applying and making the assumption that you apply Better Off funding for both of the years, but you then also run the same risk. And next year, if you'll know whether you can apply it for that purpose or not. So the effect will still be the same if you don't. You end up getting a double or triple whammy next year.
So so you just run me through the and I know we don't know the answer to all of this because that's part of the problem with the whole Three Waters / Better Off funding. No one knows exactly whether it's or where it's heading. We have an indication, we have a clear steer from the government that they intend to proceed in the time frame on which that, and that they will take over both debt and assets. If there happens to be a negative balance in the account at the point in time that it transfers, I presume that counts as debt. Because I guess one of the things we don't want to do is hand over a surplus that doesn't seem much, that's been provided for by the consumers / those connected to the three services. What happens if we have a deficit in the account at that point?
Through the chair, I mean, assuming that deficit, I will refer on to Mike Drummond or Richard in a moment, but assuming that deficit was accepted by the transition authorities, it would carry through. I'm aware that when the Auckland councils were merged, prior to their merging, all of the previous decisions were audited to make sure there was no gaming of the system to provide a disadvantage or advantage to any particular council. And I'm assuming that something similar would happen here, but I probably defer to Richard or Mike to comment on that because they're closer to the reforms.
Richard or Mike?
Through you, Mr. Chair. That is correct. There'll be a due diligence process. If it's established that council has gamed the system in terms of decisions that are building deficits by underfunding during the transition period, then we're likely not to see that debt transferred into the new entity, but it would be a decision at the time. I think the expectation is that the activities will be funded by and large in line with the LTP, and taking that approach is unlikely to cause any problems with any due diligence process that is undertaken for the transfer of the assets, including the activity balances, into a Three Waters entity.
It would be deeply ironic if we applied to them to use their Better Off funding and they declined it and then said we'd game the system by applying to use the money that they had told us that was available to be used. So I don't have any particular concern that we would be caught out for gaming the system, but there is a risk, obviously, in making an assumption around whether we receive the funding or not. Okay, thank you for the answer, Dwayne. Sorry, Councillor Bryant, continue.
So just a follow-on question. So one of the hindrances, for the want of a better word, is that we're unlikely to get the indication before we need to make this decision at the 30th of June, isn't it?
Through the chair, correct, yes. Because you won't be committing all of your money, all the things you want to apply for in tranche one through this, but you only get one shot at making an application. And before we make that application, we have to show material support, or at least that we've consulted iwi Māori properly, which we won't have, well, we might have done by the end of June, but it will be a close run thing and it may not have occurred. In either case, we won't have had time to prepare the application, submit it, have it considered and confirmed back to us.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne.
And it's not worth running the risk into the next financial year.
Well, I guess that is a decision for you. We've advised you not to apply or make the assumption of using Better Off funding for this purpose. But if you do, that's just that. Then what I'll do is my assumption is that'll be part of our application. There may be other elements that we put in as part of our application.
Thank you. Who else do I have? Councillor McKenzie, Councillor Mailing.
Just a clarification with regards to the impact from our unsuccessful application to the IAF for Wakefield and Golden Bay. So I just see in the table actually on page 19 of diligent impact on rates and net debt. It's got the IAF fund, the impact is $235 and the debt is 5,441. I mean, they seem very tiny amounts.
Sorry, through the chair, could you just reference the paragraph number?
Paragraph 11.2. So, I mean, obviously we had made an assumption. Now we're taking that assumption out because they were unsuccessful. It just seems odd amounts there.
Dwayne, or through you, Mr. Mayor, it's Matt, Finance Manager. Essentially it's negligible. Essentially we had funds in there and they were fully funded from the IAF. Now that both parts go out, so essentially the impact is literally nothing that you see there. There is a tiny impact, but to be honest, we probably should have just left that as zeros to avoid such an immaterial amount.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Through the chair, it's probably worth clarifying that the IAF money was available over several years. So we're only talking about the first year impact here, and what it's effectively done is we won't be bringing forward a lot of money in subsequent years.
Just to add, in the consultation document, we had made it clear that those IAF projects didn't have a significant effect on the rates revenue requirement.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mailing.
Just in relation to the Water Services Act costs, and I think you raised it at a previous workshop, Mr. Mayor, that it's the urban water user, the person using our wastewater systems, and probably people in the urban drainage area that are actually contributing to this Better Off funding. So I have some sympathy that we should reduce that impact, because those are the percentage of our ratepayers that are actually generating this money, because it's going to be borrowed to pay this Better Off funding. So the big urban areas would have a bigger percentage of people that use all those three services compared to us, where we have a significant number of our ratepayers that don't. So I have some sympathy for those, particularly young families that have got a lot of kids. You use a lot more water in your house than someone like me, who's retired and got new machinery that uses very little water. Yeah, that's right. That's about it. But I mean, it just seems ironic that these people are going to actually pay more, and they're the ones that are actually going to end up funding it because the costs and the standards. And if I look at wastewater standards and that those are increasing, those costs are horrendous compared to drinking water, roughly 3 times the cost. So those that are on take all 3 of those services are actually the ones that are generating this income. So that's where I have some sympathy for that. I know it's difficult to do now, but I think we should certainly keep that in mind as we go forward.
Councillor Butler, then Councillor Ogilvie.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do we have any idea of what the actual risk, the level of the risk is, that if we did decide to use some better off funding to mitigate the water costs? I think that wasn't there some indication that it would be available for that? I thought I remembered that being said in a workshop at some point.
Through this year, look, in our discussions with Crown Infrastructure Partners who are administering the fund on behalf of the Department of Internal Affairs, they have indicated they don't see this as a good use of the fund, but they haven't ruled it out altogether. That will only come once we put an application and they make a decision. In terms of so that's in terms of the probability. In terms of the consequence, that will depend on how much you assume is taken from better off funding applied to this purpose. So, for example, just to pull a number out of the air, if you wanted to use meet half of the cost of the Water Services Act increase from this, it would be roughly $500,000. So that's the deficit risk you run that you need to recover next year. There's also another risk I think that's worth mentioning though, which is around staff ability to make major changes to the annual plan. And I wonder if it's worth Matt or Mike just covering off in terms of the knock-on consequences for financials.
Mike or Matt?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll go first, Mike. Yes, so certainly the timeline as it is now, being 24th of May, and we're attempting to adopt this on 23rd of June, does not give us much time at all. We've got to get any rating fizz actually reviewed by legal, which can take week and a half, and that's with me putting some pressure on them around the potential conversation we're having now. So as it is, we still need to make, as a result of things today, we will need to make changes to the model and then flow those through. So there is a certain amount of time pressure involved with any changes we make now. One's happening with the water loop. There's a little bit more to it because there's the industrial side to it. There's the Nelson City Council as well in terms of what we charge for Champion Road. So it's a more complicated thing. So it certainly will place pressure on staff. If anything, we might need to push out the adoption date back from the 23rd of June to the 30th of June to give us an extra week. So it's not impossible, but certainly we wouldn't want a huge amount of changes today, or we wouldn't want more than a couple of changes today to sort of make it achievable to enable us to strike a rate, etc. for 22-23. Thank you.
So Matt, could you just run me through? So that sounds like, I know there's, if we make lots of changes, but if the decision was to utilise, as Dwayne said, a nice round figure, like $500,000, to offset the increases related to the Water Services Act, that seems, and the consequent impact on the water charge, that doesn't seem to be that complicated.
No, I agree. It's more how many we would do. So certainly it's possible to do it. I think there's the easier ones are where we just add $50,000 to a grant, something like that. Where this one is slightly more to it, just because it has that industrial water loop. But no, it's certainly possible. If we start changing the capital program, etc., trying to reduce rates, and it's sort of more of a bounce back with the organisation to actually find out where we would make savings, etc. But with this one, it's discreet. You know, I've got an answer, I can go and do it. So it's certainly possible.
That's the clarification. Thank you. That's the clarification I was looking for. Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Ogilvie.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 5 there, the only to her Marai, I don't mind the 50,000 coming from the reserves fund, and
so just I don't want to, but if we just focus on the water, and then we'll come to the balance of the list in due course if that's all good. So I'll come back to you. Right. So while we're on water and better off charges, we just need to come to a conclusion around this. Mr. Kirby.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just thinking of the counterfactual, if you decided today that you wanted to utilise some of the better off funding, let's say $500,000, and if they approved that, fine. If they didn't and you'd had $500,000 debt, you would then be in a situation of how you would fund that later. And one of the options you could consider is actually do a uniform targeted rate on all the water connections to cover it back again. So in other words, they end up paying for it anyway. So it's a bit of a roundabout situation. The water users effectively going to be the ones that are going to pay it because they're paying the better off funding $500,000, or they pay it through a rate through us. So it's optics really. So I think the counterfactual for you is if you put the $500,000 in, I don't think it's earth-shattering if they disapprove it, because then you just have a funding decision later and the recipients will end up paying for it anyway. So that's the option you can make.
Yes, one thing is clear from the three waters: the people paying the bills are the same people who are connected to the services today as tomorrow, as in 5 years' time, regardless of who the person they're paying it to might change, but they are the people on the hook.
And that is my point, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, well, I'm not too sure whether this conversation is going, I guess. The thought that I had in my mind is, you know, through the submission process, you know, we had people submitting, you know, with the highest cost of water, you know, anywhere. I don't actually know whether that's true or not. And so I'm thinking in my mind that it would have been quite helpful to have had a little bit more comparative information about that in terms of the price of our water compared to others. And so I was thinking in my mind that I might have wanted that for a future discussion around the better off funding, but it might be that actually that's a bit late and we're heading towards a different decision now. But I mean, if anyone's got a comment on that, it would be useful.
Anyone got a comment about comparative water charges? Mike, as in Mike Schrewer.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we do have comparative costs. They're in the National Performance Review, which was presented at the last ops meeting. I could pull them out and bring them along if that helps.
Does that just include historical as opposed to what it might be should we set these rates?
No, it's historical, so it's from last financial year, and we've had those results every year. In the last round for water and wastewater, we've dropped to about the 5th highest in the country now. We used to be about 3rd in previous years.
But I suspect with the increase we're contemplating in terms of water, we may go back up.
No, I think the reason we're up there is because we're quite ahead of most of the rest of the country in terms of our levels of service. The rest are now catching up, and I think you're going to find a few more coming up towards where we are.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Okay, look, I'll test the water. Look, I've been the strongest advocate for this, and I know that in the discussions around the better off funding, it wasn't necessarily seen as a high priority, so I'm fully anticipating it, but this may not go anywhere. But based on the discussion that we had in terms of where this money is coming from, like who's actually paying for it, and those who are facing the most significant cost. And if you look at the rates examples, the properties with the highest charges are those who are connected to water services, and it's been driven, at least in part, by their connection to water services. I don't see a significant risk in the fact that it may be declined, and I think we should put the pressure on those making a decision to decline it should they choose to. Again, I'm happy to have that debate with them about why we think it is appropriate to support some of the costs of the water services legislation and the impacts on water users from the better off funding. So I'm happy to move that we fund 50% of the cost increase of the water services legislation from the better off funding. Dwayne said.
Through the chair, I think it's 960 or 980. In the draft resolution I sent through, I just made it an even 500,000.
We'll just say, well, you can either have 500,000 or 50%. It doesn't worry me.
Close to 50% at 500,000. It's might be.
We'll make it 500,000. It's nice and easy. It makes Matt's job easier. Hey, Matt. Is there a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Dowler. I've got Councillor Turley indicating a wish to speak.
I was just wanting to second that, Mayor. Thank you.
Sorry,
It's been done.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just to almost state the obvious, but obviously it's the variable charge that's going up, but other charges are, so that the 500,000 sort of goes across that urban water club. So you'd see a drop in the fixed as well as the variable.
Yep.
And as well as those industrial users as well, those will drop accordingly. So the 500,000 won't necessarily all come off rates. It'll be a significant portion of it, but there will be an impact to the fees and charges for industrial users. Yes.
Yeah, that's at the end of the day, we're just using it to fund the cost where it falls. I don't want to try and relitigate the whole way we divide up the water charges. So that's not appropriate, although it was raised in submissions and maybe something that a future council considers as part of their long-term plan. But at the moment, it's just to cover part of the cost of the water services legislation. It's been moved and second. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Hill.
Any minor reputational damage when we say should it not be approved? That we hoped that it would be, and it wasn't, and now we've got $500,000 debt.
I guess it is possible. I guess it depends how good your reputation is to start with. Not sure the damage is going to be too significant.
Indeed. Just the framing of it, I think, that we, I think some language used about, we'd hope for something, we'd hope to receive it, and if we don't, So at that point, should any of us still be in the room, then, it's a bit sooner than that, isn't it? But, I just am aware of how that will sound, look, and be.
Yeah, I don't think we should use the word hope. We should expect to get it funded. Yeah. This is funding that's been provided through a process which sheets home the cost back to these same people that we're suggesting providing some assistance to. Both the water services legislation and the better off funding and the three waters is government policy direction. And so I think we should expect the funding, not hope. Now, clearly, there's someone else making a decision about that, but I think we should go on the basis that it's not an unreasonable expectation to have this funded from this source.
Agreed, Mayor Tim. The word hope was used, so I feel a little nervous about that.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. I share your nervousness despite the expectation. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I've a similar mindset as Councillor Hill, and the minute you say hope, I back away from wanting to, endorse it. So can we please be told what wording will be used?
Through the chair, if you can't see it, I can read it out to you.
Yeah, no, I can't see. Sorry, screens don't come up for us on Zoom. Well, not for me. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. The revised resolution for the councillor agrees to assume that $500,000 in better off funding is applied to the water services accounts in 2022-23 to offset part of the cost increase driven by the Water Services Act 2021.
Is assume still the right word, however?
Yes, it is, because we don't have a confirmation of it yet, and it's one of the many assumptions that go into the annual plan.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. So I'm just moving the replacement of 4 at this stage. So it will then become part of the broader resolution, should that be moved at a later point, subject to any further amendments that may be made. So I will put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Alan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So moving on to some of the points raised in the submission. So first of all, being around the Oneta Hua Marae. So the report notes the role the marae plays in Golden Bay, both for Māori and for other groups. And I think Samantha Margie Little, who was here at the hearing, made those points too. In the report, we had sort of used the parallel of the funding the council made to Te Awhina Marae in the long-term plan. So in that case, we had provided $50,000 towards the redevelopment of the marae, funded by the ward's reserve financial contributions. So our resolution had been to do this the same sort of thing for an Oneta Hua Marae, and using the Golden Bay reserve financial contributions. But as the change of resolution we noted earlier, that's probably no longer a possibility, because with the decisions on the Golden Bay grandstand, as I understand, at the end of the year there'll be a $15,000 balance in the Golden Bay RFCs given that decision. So there isn't the 50,000 available to do that from that source. So I guess options for you are potentially, if you agree with the staff recommendation around the funding level, you could look to fund that either from general rates or from the district facility rate. Obviously, both of those do have an impact on the overall rates revenue requirement. So we've moved that up from the 5.51%. Alternatively, the submitter, when she did the verbal submission at the hearing, mentioned the need to carry out a feasibility study. That wasn't particularly obvious from the written submission. So one option you could consider is whether to provide some funding at a lower level to support that feasibility study at this point, and I guess open the door for the marae to come back to the annual plan next year for, I guess, consideration of more substantial funding once that feasibility study is carried out.
Just a question. Can you run a deficit in an RFC account?
No. Yes, through the chair. Yeah,
Mike, I'll come to you. I saw so Mike's little light lit up immediately, so I suspected it might. I'll come. Dwayne was going to make a comment, and then Mike, but Dwayne has decided that you can go first, Mike. You'll need to go on loud, Mike.
There we go. Mute. It was the excitement. I wouldn't recommend running a deficit in a RFC account, because what you're assuming is that you will receive income in excess to what you're budgeting into that RFC account. So that is the challenge. Technically, you would have a deficit within the activity. But, so it's not a practice I would recommend. It's probably the risk that councillors are prepared to run, that they won't receive the RFCs as budgeted.
Thank you, Mike. I assumed that would be your answer. So the other question I have is, can we indicate in here that the council supports funding from the RFCs, but in the subsequent period, or at a period where it has money, and then works with on it? Because again, I wasn't 100% sure on the timing of that whole project. There appeared to be a request for both wider support and general commitment to just work with the marae over a range of activities over a period of time. There was mention about the toilet block being the first area of upgrade that was planned, but I wasn't 100% clear on the timing of that. So that's my second question, is can we kind of indicate that at that level we are willing to support however the timing is an issue.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the council could resolve to provide the funding available over time when the funds are available on the RFC account. That would be quite in order.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I will come to Councillor Hill and then Councillor McKenzie.
Kia ora, through you, Chair. The Golden Bay Community Board sent through their recommendation, didn't they, around that the marae received the money and through RFCs. It wasn't a unanimous decision. There was a question by a member of the board around, they seem to have an idea that it's just for the Māori community, the facility. And I don't know if any of us are, needing any reassurance, whether any should be needed actually, but that, hundreds of people go through that marae in a year, in a normal year, like a load of people. And, most of the, Māori language classes are for Māori, but, largely populated by non-Māori people. It has its, uses in civil defence. So in terms of it being a community facility, there's no doubt about that. Has a a lot of varied hui through the year. Student groups, council, all sorts of places go on their dock, And I remember when it was refurbished, maybe it's 25 years ago now. Some funding from TDC was sought and declined. And so an application was made to grant some rates for $500, and that was declined too. So things have changed, haven't they? And it's very good to be where we are today, where a very positive relationship and support. I think I'm not quite clear on the feasibility process. I know there's a lot of support coming, and from staff at TPK around Te Puni Kōkiri around their funding application. So my preference would be RFCs, and I just wonder how, in terms of your income coming in, budgeted over the next 1, 2, 3 years, how accurate is that usually?
I'll come across to Dennis in terms of any suggestions he wishes to make, and particularly around the forecasting of development reserve financial contributions, because they are largely based on subdivision or development.
It's Richard Holly's account, but I'm not too sure how the budgets are set. But the history has been that we, over the last few years, we've been over recovering. Both in relation to development contributions and reserve contributions, because the pace of development has exceeded, our estimates. And there are a couple of subdivisions in the pipeline, as we are aware, in Golden Bay. So there will be some funding coming in. But the other suggestion I could make is that the ward basis for our RSCs is a construct that the council has come up with. Technically, the money can be applied across the district if you wish it to be, and the Onetahua Marae is used for district-wide purposes. So you could, if you wished to, fund the request from other ward RSC accounts that are in surplus.
Yeah, and interestingly, the discussion to my right from Councillor Mailing, I think the single Richmond councillor in attendance, who's feeling left out of not having a marae, had already indicated that perhaps the Richmond ward would like to make a contribution. So that is an interesting suggestion, Dennis. And it could be done it could be a contribution, or it could just be paid for from there until the point in time where revenue comes into the Golden Bay account, and then it's offset back again. So I think that's probably Mike. Did you want to comment? No, that's good.
I did have a follow-up, Mayor, if I may.
Thank you, Councillor Hill.
Just to follow up, just to note that the amount of money that the car parking for the grandstand will cost hasn't been settled on. The design, detailed design hasn't happened. So we don't quite know where we'll end up there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Look, I'm pretty confident that between a combination of money coming into the Golden Bay RFCs over the balance of the 12 months, that the suggestion that Dennis made that we, because I get general feeling is supportive for the funding, and it's just a question of the source, that it's funded from RFCs, full stop, and that the internals of how that is transferred between can be worked out. But I think, working on the basis that if it's funded from other wards in the interim, that should Golden Bay's revenue meet it, that it will be met from that source. In the absence of that, it'll be repaid to the other accounts from which it came. So people,
good for a payback.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. So if that can be reflected in the resolution, it probably just needs to say funded from reserve financial contributions, full stop. Thank you. Alan, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So moving on to the next couple of submissions, which are around the district museums. So we had submissions from
we're breaking. Yeah.
The Motueka Museum and also the Golden Bay Museum seeking additional funding. So in the case of Motueka, it was towards some additional costs and increased storage requirements, and in Golden Bay, it was increased work and meeting space, employee amenities, and also looking for funding towards some employee costs and increase in the staffing. So just to draw attention, there is a third district museum, which is the Murchison Museum. So and certainly when we've looked at these previously, we've sort of looked at equivalent funding, although the Murchison Museum does get funded at a lower level than the other two. Ultimately, staff recommendation here is that is not to provide additional funding at this stage. Oh, sorry, just to go back, we did include in the report some information there on our previous funding changes. So we increased the funding to both the Golden Bay and Motueka Museum by $15,000 per annum in the long-term plan 2018-2028. So not the current LTP, but the previous ones, and that gets adjusted by inflation each year. So it's sort of going up gradually with inflation. So again, come back to the recommendation. So our recommendation is not to provide funding at this point, but to further consider the funding of those, all of the district museums and potentially provincial museum as well as part of the next LTP process.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Open for discussion, Councillor Ogilvie.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. What Alan just said is that the increase happened in 2018, but there's no likely increase until 2024, 2025, the first year of the next long-term plan. Now, that really is 6 years with only an inflation-based increase, and it's nowhere near sufficient. I mean, both the Chris Sutton from Motueka and Jeff Redison from Golden Bay, I thought made it very clear that both museums and their boards are not really coping with the increased costs of inflation, staff costs and wages, so that is, insurance and all the other costs relevant to museums. Murchison may be able to cope. I don't know. Councillor Bryant may be aware. My suggestion was going to be that we increase each one by the amounts of $25,000 for Motueka, $15,000 for Golden Bay, and $10,000 for Murchison, a total of $50,000, which would actually be comparable to what happened in 2018. And it would actually right the ship in terms of where the museums are coming from. So that would be my suggestion. I think the need for it was made very clear by both Chris and by Jeff in their submissions. And $50,000 across the general rate is not huge. Sorry, the museum rate. Yeah. So currently the museum rate I think is about $65, $67 per ratepayer. And most of that, I haven't got the proportion with me, goes to the Nelson Provincial Museum. So the increase of $50,000 would need to be calculated by our meeting in June, so we can actually say yes or no finally to that. But I think the amount is reasonably low across, you're looking at probably $50,000 per ratepayer only.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ogilvie, for the suggestion. So just so we're clear, this does, I'll come back to you, Alan. So this does come from the museum rate.
And it's about $2 extra ratepayer.
Correct. Thank you, Councillor Ogilvie. So I'll come across to Alan, and then I've got Councillor Butler.
Yeah, just to clarify that the museum rate, as I understand it, is part of the uniform annual general charge. So it applies equally regardless of capital value. So, you know, like to have a bigger impact on those people with lower value properties than the higher ones in proportional terms.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Councillor Butler. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, I just a risk of starting a turf war. I think that the Golden Bay Museum does as much, has as much capacity and does as much work as the Motueka one, really. So I don't. I just feel that the Motueka and the Golden Bay Museum, I don't see a case for giving Motueka more than Golden Bay, actually. So that's just my take on it. I'd like to see that even out. But I do support I do support some funds going to the museums because you know, they do struggle and they're doing pretty well with what they do get.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Hill. And we will break, just so those who are looking at me sideways, we will break for a cup of tea post this item. Thank you. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a concern about the sort of, you know, how sustainable the models are, really. And that, you know, that there can be ongoing requests, each annual plan, long-term plan for more money each round over and above inflationary increases annually. I'm very supportive of the museums. I just have a concern about that the models aren't sustainable ultimately. And I do think it's a bigger question, of course, but I do think that our provincial museum, which I'm very supportive of too, you know, I'd love a setup where there's more linking into there in some way in terms of resource, not just in staff help, but in terms of the way things are set up and funded. And yeah, I think we need a little paradigm shift in some way. So supportive of extra funding, always a tension, isn't it? Because people are saying to us, don't increase the rates at all. How can you? We're bankrupt. So, you know, yeah, always twixt in between, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the idea of a little paradigm shift.
Thanks.
That's all right. Right, any further comments? So Councillor Ogilvie has made a suggestion at this point. I'm not sure whether he moved it as a resolution, but
I can move that as a resolution, Mr. Mayor. And just to point out that what Jeff Richardson asked for was 12,700, I think, in his submission. And Chris Sutton asked for 25,000 because of their storage facilities, as an answer to Councillor Butler's comments.
Yeah, I did note that the requests were different. Thank you. Councillor Ryan.
I'm happy to second it pro forma, and can I just speak to it now, Mr. Mayor? I do have a question first, though, that Susan might be able to answer, or someone. Just in relation to the museum rate, we have now combined the district-wide and the provincial all into one, isn't it? So what Councillor Ogilvie is saying won't have promoting won't affect the provincial museum grant at this stage.
through you, Mr. Mayor, we have combined the district facilities and the shared facilities rates into now, but the museum has always been it is one rate. The museum rate is one, and it does have so it was the operating rates that we combined into the capital rates.
That's right.
The museum rate has always been one, which is partly funded by partly to fund the provincial museum and partly to fund the other museums.
Regional museums.
Yeah, the regional museums. So it is one rate.
Do you know the amount that goes to the provincial museum off the top of your head?
About 900,000.
Okay, so we didn't have a increase for that. That's something we would normally consider through the long-term plan. What sort of made me lead to the pro forma seconding of Councillor Ogilvy's is that 6 years is quite a time for these museums to operate on the same. And I know in Murchison, because they own the building, which is getting older, that Beth, the curator there, has alluded to me a number of times that they've got quite a cost and ongoing maintenance. So I'm sure that they would be appreciative of that if this was to go through. So yeah, I guess 6 year adjustment, it's not very much in each year over 6 years. So I'm supportive at this stage.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. I mean, this comment really does take us down into the weeds, but I'm going to say it anyway. Generally speaking, I'm supportive of the amendment. I mean, I think it's a sad state of affairs if we don't have good functioning museums in our society. But, you know, like I can remember when I went through the profit and loss statements for the Golden Bay Museum, I mean, I was horrified to see that they were paying about $100 a week for power. And it just makes me think about how do we make sure that actually we've got these facilities and good sites where you've got energy, efficiency and all the rest of the things. Otherwise, for year after year after year, we're throwing money away, whereas in actual fact, it might be that a bigger investment might actually reduce the operating costs going forward. So maybe this is a requirement to put to the boards or something.
I think coming back to Councillor Hill's previous concerns over the model, and I think probably aligns quite well with the concerns that's been raised by Councillor Mackenzie, and that is a conversation I think we do need to have with those leading up to the next draft long-term plan, because perhaps a capital investment, and that does open up the possibility of utilising Golden Bay's case, perhaps not so much, the use of RFCs, where it's a capital investment, whether that's in storage, whether that's in improved technology or buildings that are cheaper to run, if you can invest some capital in them. But I think that is a conversation for that process. Today, I think we just need to focus on Councillor Ogilvy's suggestion, which is largely around the operational, supporting the operational costs, albeit that some of those may be higher than ideal. Is there any further comments before I move to put the resolution, Councillor Mailing?
I just speak against it in the basis of, and I'm not against museums, but we do put a lot of money into them, in that a lot of these little museums start off being run by volunteers, and then they start employing staff. And the problem is that they rely on funding, some from ratepayers, but some from grants. And it's very difficult to get funding from grants for paying staff. So you start off with a nice model that works quite well with volunteers, but then you end up employing people and there's a cost. And I think one of the other organisations we're going to talk about later on is in a similar position. So it just becomes more and more difficult. And I think at times that for our ratepayers, particularly the further away you get from Nelson City, we're paying a lot of money for a facility they don't get a lot of use of, but it all comes out of the same bucket. But I just think the model, as Councillor Hill said, I don't think is sustainable in the future.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mailing. Councillor Hill, and then I'll put the resolution.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I agree with Councillor Christine's comments. Sorry. Mackenzie's comments around, you know, because part of the issue at Tākaka is honestly in there, it's a complete rabbit warren in that building. Like, it's just terrible. The conditions they work under are terrible. You know, they scrabble around to find somewhere to have their cup of tea. And you know, there is something needs to be looked at further. I mean, if that place could just be gutted out a bit and remodeled inside, and you know, they've got heat pumps galore because there's so many tiny little rooms, and to me. So appreciate your thinking there, Councillor Mackenzie.
Okay, thank you. I think there's been enough conversation on this matter. I will look to put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
Resolution is carried. We will now break for 10 minutes and come back at 11:20. Alan, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So moving forward, so the next item to look at is the Top of the South neighbourhood support. At the end of the deliberation, hearings, councillors asked for some more information on their funding sources, and particularly, I guess, our funding compared with Nelson City and Marlborough District Council. So that's information is provided in the addendum report. I think it's fair to say our funding is significantly lower than the other two councils, that information they provided us. The addendum report also includes the details of the funding through the community grants scheme, so what that was for. I guess from a staff and vice point of view, we certainly kind of feel positively in terms of the sort of service that Top of the South neighbourhood support provides, and pretty vital role that they play. And I guess keeping that cohesion within neighbourhoods has been particularly important during the COVID-19 kind of restrictions. And so our recommendation was to provide funding of $10,000. It's a general rates funded. That's the source. So that's the recommendation for you to discuss and consider.
Thank you, Alan. Open for discussion. Councillor Mailing.
Well, I'm supportive of this, although I do find it frustrating that this funding, this whole organisation was firstly funded by the police in Hull as a crime prevention unit, and then it was funded through the Prime Minister's office and the crime prevention unit that was there. And over the years, it's just got harder and harder for these organisations. But particularly when we had the fires and we've had civil defence issues, they have been of assistance. And I think that's why I think we should put this little bit in, but I do find it frustrating. But it does make sense.
Thank you, Councillor Mailing.
Sorry, just a supplementary piece of information that I meant to cover. So we did provide $10,000 each for what was then the Waimea neighbourhood support and the Motueka neighbourhood support in 2019. That was done from a special port dividend. So, but that was a one-off at that point. I gather they've now sort of all merged into the Top of the South. So.
Thank you, Alan. Any further comments? All right, moving on.
So moving on. So the next items is the Pohara Boat Club. So the Boat Club submission was looking for three different things. So one was really looking for some security of tenure through their lease. So as I understand it from staff, there's negotiations ongoing on the lease. So there certainly isn't, as I understand, any intention that lease wouldn't happen. It's just working through the details. Again, I don't think that's really something that we should deal with through the annual plan. They were looking for some resurfacing of the roadway between the entrance to the port and the boat ramp. As I understand it, it's currently crushed lime, and they're looking really to get that resurfaced with a tarmac surface. Advice from staff is that they feel that the current surface is fit for purpose, and so weren't recommending any change for that. And then the final item that that the Pahara Boat Club were looking for was around a crane lift for helping disabled sailors in and out of boats as part of the future redevelopment of the port. Again, I think staff's understanding is that that's certainly something that can be facilitated at that point. I think the plan is to relocate where some of that recreational boating takes place in the port anyway, and so that will be be considered and built into that process. So yeah, so there are two resolutions, number 9 and 10, that deal with that.
Thank you, Alan. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I noted on the presentation made from the boat club that it was the South Island regional something or other chat, and I noticed that a bit of it was certainly outdated. So Wakaama, I haven't been involved in the boat club for a while there, and slides just seem to be from some previous incarnation for some other application. So I have wondered about this floating jetty and how widely that's been canvassed among boat club members and the sailing community generally. So I'm just a little concerned that maybe I'm reading it a little wrong, but that we pop something into the the port development plan on the basis of one submission from somebody without other input and I mean, absolutely for accessible sailing, absolutely. But I just am a little concerned this is a nationwide thing that he pops up on all the South Island, representing clubs and with the same thing. So I have a question about whether the floating jetty has a purpose other than for accessible sailing, and also is this what other purposes would it have? And because the boat club's sailing program is really reduced significantly. Although the numbers look great on the presentation, they weren't that accurate in my view. And yeah.
So firstly, Mike, just want to touch on, I think the floating jetty has been part of the overall Port Tarakau redevelopment plan that we didn't receive funding from various places over time. Well, conversation's still ongoing, actually. I think I've got another meeting about it, might be this week or next week. But I think that the floating jetty per se has been part of that plan for some time. Mike, you just want to clarify that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the facilities have been discussed in the past. The absolute detail hasn't been agreed on. It would form part of the relocation of the existing recreational marina. At that time, you would probably explore further exactly the form of those facilities. It's probably not a matter for the annual plan. It's a matter for the development plan for Port Tarakau. That will proceed provided we get that additional funding support from the government.
Thank you. So the floating jetty is a part of the recreational setup?
Correct.
That is correct. So if it's...
I was just trying to make sense of the point that we'll ensure that notation of the jetty is included in the description. So is that suggesting it isn't already? I just didn't quite get that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think their view is they want to strengthen the case and get a level of commitment from council effectively to the Pahara Boat Club that a floating jetty will be provided as part of that development plan. In my view, that is still a discussion that needs to be had in conjunction with the future development of the port, rather than a matter for the annual plan conversation.
Thank you. And just to note that the road in there's, usually has some pretty big potholes in it. And perhaps it's because they raised it, didn't they? Would we get it sealed? And I understood that it was the boat club's responsibility to maintain it. Is that correct or not? And if it's ours, then we do need to go along there and fill in some of those holes. Thank you.
So through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure about who is responsible for maintaining the road. I will make some inquiries. If it is council, then I will get repairs undertaken.
Thank you, Mike. Alan?
Yeah, so just if you do have nervousness about the noting the floating jetty, then perhaps it might maybe better to then delete resolution number 9. We were suggesting that we would note that the floating jetty as part of the description of this project in the annual plan. So if you've got concerns about that,
I think we could just change it to note that a floating jetty is included.
Yeah.
Because I think it is. Currently, we don't need to ensure that it is. It just is part of the description of the. Where was I was gone? Yeah. Does that just reflects the current state, I think.
Thank you. To me, it sounded like there wasn't one already, and or that perhaps this is seeking another one. Or thank you.
Yeah, no, I think with Mike's clarification, we just need to ensure that there is currently one proposed as part of the recreational marina development, which is part of the overall Port Kowie redevelopment plan. And if it is, we need to note it. And if it isn't, we can just stay silent about it.
Just a quick comment, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ogui.
Do we need to refer this to the Harbour Master for his comment, just to see whether it relates or not relevant?
Not at this point, I don't think. If it ever gets to the point of actually discussing building one, then perhaps he will have an opinion at that point.
I thought we were discussing whether it was in there or not. That was why I asked the question.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments in relation to this item? If not, moving on, Alan.
Okay, so moving on to the Tasman Environmental Trust. So in their submission, they were seeking funding towards the pest-free Onatahua Farewell Spit project. Again, they came and talked to their submission at the hearing. So just in terms of current funding, so we're currently providing the trust. We increased our funding in the last LTP from 10,000 to 40,000 per annum for their general range of projects. They also made a submission to the LTP asking for a further 20 to 50,000 towards their core and restore enhancing estuaries and Te Ihu project, but that was not that was declined. And yeah, just kind of reinforce staff have been supporting the pest-free Onatahua Farewell Spit project. So quite a bit of staff time going in that, and will continue to do so. And I guess there's an opportunity there to redirect some existing funding from some pest-free budgets on a $10,000 a year for the next few years sort of basis. So wouldn't affect rates in terms of the annual plan, but a way of providing some support to that project over the next few years. So that was our staff recommendation.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, it's not clear to me from the submission as to where this requested funds would go. Tasman Environment Trust say in their submission that an additional 2.85 million needs to be raised in order for Pest-Free 2050 to commit to contributing 3 million. So I'm wondering, is this request that they've made intended to actually contribute to this 2.85 million? It's just a bit vague as to whether it is actually going to be used for pest eradication on the ground, whether it's going to go towards Tasman Environment Trust operational costs, or whether it's going to go to this, and whether that counts for the 2.85 million. You know, I see that council are already involved in this project and have given 120 hours of work, and I'm just wondering why council is not actually using this money itself to actually contribute to this project. I'm assuming that money from the Wilding Pines, which has been freed up, could be used by council. So, you know, I suppose my question is really, I'd just like to see a bit more detail about where that money's going to go.
Alan, so for Rob Smith, who provided this information, is not on the call, so I can't answer all of those questions. I mean, I guess there is an opportunity for us, if councils are mind to support the staff recommendation to tag that to pest management as part of that project. So we could certainly do that. Obviously there are alternative ways. No doubt there are alternative ways that council could use that $10,000 for pest eradication within the district as a whole. But this was suggested as a way to provide some financial support to that project. Whether that does anything in terms of the total that they need to raise, not sure.
And I mean, I think that probably we had the opportunity to ask when they did actually make their submission, which was missed probably by me. But I think it's important to tag those funds, and that would be my thought. Would be that we tag those funds for pest, their predator eradication project.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Mackenzie, then Councillor Hill.
Thank you very much. The obviously I sit as a trustee on this trust on behalf of the council. The Tasman Environment Trust was actually an arm that was actually set up by a number of parties, one of which was this council. So actually it's a way of delivering biodiversity outcomes through another entity. The Onatahua Whewā Spit project, it's a massive project with huge biodiversity gains to be made. One of the really important things for the trust in terms of the council committing support to the project, and that support being money, is its ability to leverage that money off other funders. So whether it be philanthropic organisations or RATA or whatever, it's really important that TDC is actually seen to have skin in the game. The trust actually runs quite a sophisticated financial management system. So all of its revenues and expenditures relating to individual projects are properly accounted for against those projects. So it's not as though this $10,000 is actually going to be consumed in, untracked overheads. So I really support this. Obviously, I would like it to be much bigger, because actually, in a way, this is not the council expanding its work in biodiversity, it's just redirecting. But as a small token, I think that we should definitely support this. It'll just be amazing if, in actual fact, this whole thing comes off, and we have to be seen to fund it in order to raise all the rest of the funding that needs to be raised.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I think fantastic project, absolutely. I'm just wondering, I guess my overall feeling is that with $2.85 million to be raised, our $10,000 here and there, it really is token. And I think that there's the project has a national profile. It's hooked on with the 2050. It's one of the regional projects. And I'm thinking of those people out in the communities, and there's a lot of them who are eradicating pests too in other areas. And they go out and they spend 7 hours on their tramp, doing their track lines. And I just wonder whether it could be redirected somewhere to, Project Divine or somewhere smaller that actually would make a more significant difference to. When they're talking this out, they're talking big money here that they need, and I don't quite get that $10,000 a year is going to make a big difference in terms of them capitalising on that for, seeking more funding. Where would it be directed if it wasn't going to be directed here? And if it wasn't redirected, what would happen with it, please?
Alan.
So I can't give you specific answers, but I say I'm sure that there is lots of pest management work to be done around the district. So I'm sure there are lots of other alternatives, but I can't give you specifics of where it would be redirected.
Just on the second point, sorry, on the point that Councillor Hill raised about Project Divine, did we not in the long-term plan provide additional funding? Can someone remind me? Okay, thank you.
I guess I just think that, you know, the big outfit, I know they've got a lot of work ahead of them, big profile, big funders that, you know, lots of these little groups around the place that are having a really good impact, you know, Friends of Flora, Friends of Cobb. I'm sure they'd be very pleased with an extra 10 grand, and I'm inclined that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Susan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I was just going to note that the resolution doesn't actually say that we're going to give the money to the particular group. It says that the money is going to be redirected from general pest management specifically to support that particular project. That could be council giving the money to them, or it could also be council deciding that it wants to undertake the work itself. So if you want it specifically to go to the group, then we probably need to add that into the resolution. If you're just happy to leave it vague like that and let officers make a call as to whether it's best for us to spend the money towards the project or to give the money to the group, then that would be, you know, that the way the resolution is worded now would be fine to deal with that. And the other thing in terms of on the last question around what would happen to the money if it wasn't used for this project, it would be used for general pest management across the district, because that's the budget that it sits within at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Susan, for those additional remarks. Any further comments? Councillor Mayling, Councillor Bryant, and then Councillor Butler.
Yeah, just briefly, we talk about what we've been able to do with wilding pines and pest management because of the COVID money, we've had a lot more money to spend on environmental issues than we've ever had before. I'm supportive of this, redirecting this money. It's seed money, but I'd just like to question, this area is actually administered by DOC, as I understand it. So they would be a major funder as well.
I think someone asked that question of the submitter, and I wasn't sure DOC was. Oh, it might have been Councillor Mackenzie asked the question, and I'm not sure that DOC are a major contributor at this point of funding, but it must also cover private land as well as Department of Conservation land, doesn't it? The entire area, if you look at there is a combination of Councillor Mackenzie.
Well, yeah, no, Councillor Mayling asked that question during the submission process. You know, all parties actually need to get involved and get skin in the game. It's reasonably early on in terms of actually stitching this whole thing together, but certainly as a trustee, you know, I've expressed my view that, you know, DOC is the expert at aerial 1080 control, and that they need to be leading in terms of that operation. I mean, $10,000, it's a drop in a bucket in terms of what needs to be stitched together in order to achieve this project. And you know, we as a council, we need to be supporting the very organisation that we helped to create. We need to get the leverage in terms of other funders. We need to get the leverage in terms of how it supports the volunteer effort and projects. And so I just can't speak strongly enough about the fact that we should support this project.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Butler.
Yeah, I think just to follow on the theme that this is a big project and there are other partners involved, Health Post. The big Health Post business has a trust called the Health Post Trust, and they're one of the partners. DOC is one of the partners, and so I think we need to be aware that you know, there are other big players. I support the 10,000. I think that's fine, but I think we just, given that they've asked for 50, I think we just need to be aware of how all these things play out, and that are we contributing, you know, relevant to the other calls on our funding in terms of ratepayers, when actually there may be other partners. Maybe how much is DOC contributing? We're not sure. We don't know. And I think that in this type of situation going forward, we need to have all that on the table so that we actually know where we're fitting in. And I noticed that we don't have staff here today to talk to this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Maling's asked my question just in relation, I think there's an item coming to strategy and policy on Thursday in relation to the joint starting the joint pest management again to enable us to enact changes around pests faster. I'm just wondering with this and that, will that have any long-term budget implications? I'm not sure. Susan, if you might be able to answer that. Or...
Please repeat the question.
Oh, it's just in relation to, there's an item on Thursday in relation to the Joint Pest Management Committee and some budgetary expenditure in relation to that, what that would involve. And this money, is that likely to put any serious impact on our budgets, or this budget rather?
The item coming to the Strategy and Policy Committee is to re-establish the Joint Pest Management Committee. The establishment of the committee will have a slight impact on budgets just in terms of supporting the committee and things, but it won't have any impact directly on this until such time as you adopt another regional pest management strategy, which might have additional requirements in it.
But I don't think there's any, I think it's just to make amendments at this stage, because I don't think we have to do the whole plan for 10 years under the currently, where previously it was much shorter. Yeah.
That's correct. It is just to make some amendments to bring in some species that were not covered at the time and were deemed to be pests at the time when the strategy was last adopted.
Okay, no, thank you. Perhaps Councillor McKenzie would just like to move that we reaffirm the
There's no alteration, it just...
Okay.
Councillor Hill has some reservations that it could be redirected elsewhere, but other than that, the indication so far is that it's supported. I've just got a couple of questions. One is the difference between pest-free and predator-free. So I think it's predator-free 2050. So that's the national strategy, predator-free. And I know this is pest-free. Open question. So I'm not sure if that's significant or not. And secondly, I guess what it highlights is the enormous cost of aiming for either of those objectives. This is quite a big area, but it's a tiny area in the grand scheme of things, and most of it's surrounded by sea with a relatively discrete access point. And it's, if I could get this correctly, it's raising 2.5 million to access 3 million, which is approximately 6 million, 5.5 million. So it does, I guess, highlight the enormous challenge and the phenomenal cost of extending it to larger land areas that don't have the benefits that Fair Spit might have in terms of kind of location and kind of secure borders, for want of a better term, with the sea surrounding it. So, but the question is pest versus predator.
I'm kind of joining the dots here, presuming there are pests that are not predators. So
I presume that's right. Good from you, Alan. I'd got that far. My question was simply: was this a conscious decision to move from predators to pests, and how does it relate, and what's the cost implications of making the differentiation?
Google.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's my place to actually respond to that. I could, but I think it's really for staff to do that.
Yeah, I'm happy to get the answer elsewhere rather than now. Okay, and just noting that we increased through the long-term plan process the funding for Project Divine from $25,000 to $35,000 per year. Okay, thank you very much. I'll just take it that people are generally happy with it as it is, and we'll move on to the next item.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the next item's Martin Farm Road. So Submitter Steve Neve brought forward a proposal for us to do work to improve the safety, particularly pedestrian safety on Martin Farm Road. So his suggestions included widening the road, constructing a sort of a boardwalk footpath and barriers dividing the footpath from the road, some new parking areas, and provision of bins, dog litter bins, those sorts of things. So, from a staff point of view, certainly there are concerns around the safety of Martin Farm Road, and staff are. I know that Jamie has met Steve on site and walked through his proposals. Staff are working on investigating some sort of lower cost improvements that we can make out of existing budgets in the forthcoming financial year. Again, in the addendum report, certainly staff feel that Mr. Neve's proposals are feasible, but cost of about $600,000, so quite a capital cost. So staff say trying to make some lower cost improvements in the current financial year, and suggesting that we consider the overall project further in the next long-term plan process.
Thank you.
I've just had some discussions with
Councillor Mackenzie.
Jamie McPherson, and he has got a low-cost proposal of $130K that he can fund from existing budgets. And he's met Mr. Neve, and Mr. Neve is quite happy with those as a short-term measure. So once we've done those, we'll determine whether they're successful or not, whether we need to fund any further work next year.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Useful to know. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, thank you. I do note that he's got on his Facebook page that there's whispers of positive action coming our way. So I'm assuming that's referring to the 130K. Well, I actually went out there for a bit of a look in the weekend, and I made this comment this morning. I mean, I agree that we need to look at something, but can we please keep the signage to a minimum? The way that it is at the moment, honestly, it's completely over the top and it's visually polluting.
It is, and probably at this time of year, not massively necessary. And so I think, like many things to do with transportation, particularly around areas of high congestion for short periods, we just need to be better at what needs to be there when it's a problem, and then perhaps it just disappears when it isn't for a period, and it returns to a less polluted environment. So whether that signage can be, more at a time when it's necessary and less at a time when it isn't, I think all these things need to be taken into account. So, but it's good advice. Thank you, Richard. The other key thing I would say is we need to have very close conversations and remain very closely connected to the Recreation Reserve Board, who has a strategic plan underway currently. I know they have concerns over the same issues and have looked at boardwalk options, albeit around the other side of the estuary. And it doesn't probably make a lot of sense to build two significant boardwalks given the cost of them. And so having that conversation about sharing both the cost and the planning, given that they're in the process of a planning process currently, and theirs will cover the estuary component of the area concerned, will be important to keep in mind. Other than that, if there's nothing further, move on, Alan.
Okay, so moving on now away from issues that came up in submissions to other changes. So we talked briefly earlier about the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund. So in the consultation document, we were looking at the 3 projects. We obviously know now there's only one of those, the Motueka West one, that's advancing to the next stage. So yeah, so there is a change from what we talked about in the consultation document. And as noted earlier, the impact on rates is pretty negligible from that change. So there's no, I don't think we need to, labour that point. There's a minor staff change around waste minimisation. So in the past, part of one of the positions in the community partnership team has been, 0.4 of the positions been funded by use of the waste levy, and that person's carried out quite a lot of waste minimisation activities as part of their role. Discussion earlier about the need to focus on waste stewardship and waste minimisation, and certainly the executive leadership team have approved the creation of a full-time role in that space. Well, what that means is that there's then 0.4 an FTE in the community partnership team that the funding for which needs to be addressed. The suggestion is that 0.1 of that is still funded from the waste levy, but there's then a 0.3 of an FTE to be funded, which is just under $20,000, and that would be funded by general rates. So the staff recommendation is that small change is funded through general rates.
So given the conversation we had earlier about the shift to funding waste minimisation from the waste minimisation budget and reducing the $700,000 a year that we currently put in from general rates, this seems a little out of kilter with that direction. Question? Answers? Susan?
So the new role that is proposed in the engineering services area would be fully funded from the waste levy. And that means that some of the funding that's currently for one of the positions in community partnerships needs to be funded from another source. So that, because that part of the funding that currently goes towards the community partnerships role would go towards the new role in engineering, which leaves us with a gap in terms of the funding for one of the existing staff in the community partnerships team. So I suppose that in the intent that where waste minimisation work is funded from waste levy, that's the intention with the new role, but it just leaves us with a gap with the current staff member.
So what will they be doing? So in their 0.4 of a role, or 0.3, what will they be doing? What's their actual job?
Their actual job is they work with, it's one of the environmental education and community partnerships officer jobs. So that role includes working with schools across the district, not just in Enviro Schools ones, dealing with water quality work, air quality work, biodiversity work. They also will be doing a 0.1 of a FTE role in terms of waste minimisation. Yeah, so it'll be basically expanding. Yeah. Mm.
Any questions, comments, feedback? Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't quite cotton on to the fact that this person's got a job. I mean, they're employed and we've got a gap of money to pay them. I think, is that a fair summary?
I think that does sound like the situation, yes.
What if we said no, what would happen?
Susan.
I'm a little bit uncomfortable having this conversation in a public meeting.
Of course, yeah. Sorry. I guess I had in mind that this was something that was getting generated separately, and I had a question then, if that was the case, about how essential the work is in the community, I suppose. So it's difficult now then to have a conversation about the role, isn't it, and the funding? Because it has been brought to a public meeting, and then we're limited to what we can ask or say about it.
I think you can take by implication what the implication is.
So is this a yeah, it's an interesting way, isn't it, of ensuring that someone's role continues to be funded through this sort of this process. It just seems a little strange to me.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Is there any further comment? Right. If not, Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what we're agreeing to is a lifting of staff numbers. That's the impact of, that's what we're really agreeing to. Kind of in a backdoor way, if you like, because part of a role was redirected to somewhere else. So I guess it is an odd way to go about it.
Agreed. Right. So it's contained in a resolution. Is there any? Right. Moving on.
Okay. So final item from the report is around the Motueka Catchment Management Plan. So recently been through consultation and the submission hearings and deliberation process. So the panel has recommended the council adds $100,000 budget for the next financial year to progress the improvements actioned in the catchment management plan. So yeah, thinking that it's obviously the aim is to reduce the impact of the frequently occurring floods in that area, specifically that sort of less severe kind of what you might call nuisance flooding. And so yeah, staff are anticipating the money would be spent on increasing sump and soak pit density, and yeah, accelerating some storm water works proposed by the transportation
source of funding. Yeah,
through the
capital funding.
Stormwater rate.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. Thank you, Alan. Councillor Ogilvie.
Surprise, Mr. Mayor. First of all, the word considers, is there any significance for that?
Other than we're being asked to consider it today.
Well, obviously every other item has been the word notes or agrees, but this is considered. So I just wonder whether, that's why I asked the question about significance.
Through the chair, I can address that one. It's because it's a request from the hearing and deliberation panel. It's not a staff recommendation. It's a request from them through this to the full council to consider including that money in your plan. You should, if you want to agree to it, you do need to change it to agrees to.
Right. And secondly, Mr. Mayor, the amount is 100,000. So is that, currently we spend about $100,000 per annum on capital works, minor and major. So this $100,000 is extra.
Through the chair, yeah, there's a fund of roughly $100,000 for minor improvements. I think it's largely operation funded, actually, oddly. And this is in addition to that, but specifically it's capital and it's specifically for Motueka.
All right. Just a comment, Mr. Mayor. It's basically underwriting the business as usual aspect of the whole Motueka stormwater field. We can, in Motueka, I suppose, cover a 1 and 2 year event. We have difficulties in covering a 1 and 5 year event in particular areas of Motueka. To give you an example, which you all know about, in 2013, I think it was, maybe 2013, with the flood which affected Richmond, Queen Street in particular. I think there was 110 mils in the period for Richmond. We had 70 in Motueka. A number of houses had to be sandbagged. A number of houses had water into their housing, not the habitable parts. It was their toilets and their laundry and their garage, not habitable. And that was regarded as a 1 and 5 year event. If it had been reversed, if we'd had the Richmond amount and vice versa, then we could not have sustained. It would have been a major event. So this is fine. I'm not going to deny this at all, but it's not really looking into the future. There's no focus on the future. And as I said in my hearing statement at the hearings, it really is planning for almost for tomorrow. Sorry, it's planning for yesterday rather than for tomorrow. We have to have something major. If you want to spend 100,000, I'd say borrow 2.5 million at 4%. That allows you 100,000 expenditure. That'd be far more impactful than 100,000 on minor capital works to manage a 1 and 2 year event. which we're doing anyway with $100,000 operational funding per annum, quite successfully. So I'm quite happy with the 100,000. But what I'm suggesting is make it 2.5 million as a loan at 4%, 100,000. So that's my comments. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ogilvie. Councillor Mackenzie.
Well, the 100,000 is capital, not operating. So just to clarify, right? So this.
Yeah, it is.
This is 100,000 capital. Yeah, okay. So I guess I just want to tease out. I get that this is a recommendation that's come from the hearing panel. Is it supported by staff?
I'll give you a slightly long answer to that through the chair. It means going back to the Motueka catchment management plan process that we've been through. And essentially that the advice of staff to the hearings panel and to council prior to that was actually trying to achieve our Q100 level of service in 100 years' time in the areas that need it is not cost effective. It ends up being somewhere between $600,000 to $1.5 million per dwelling protected, which is not financially viable for this council to undertake on even a small scale, let alone trying to achieve that same cost across the district. What the staff have recommended is that in Motueka that the council focus on trying to reduce more frequent flooding events that are of a lower intensity, so that people don't have their streets flooded, there's fewer garages flooded and things like that. And the hearings panel in principle has endorsed that same approach. What they have here is to say they'd like to get started more quickly, and I think the staff can support that.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne. Anything further? I take it, Councillor Ogilvie, despite your preference for something slightly different, that you are happy to change considers to agrees. Thank you. Right, thank you, Alan.
Okay, so yeah, just again, the next resolution really is just noting the impact of some of the decisions you made on fees and charges in the previous report. They will obviously flow through into the annual plan. I guess this is also an opportunity if there's anything from the submissions that councillors want to raise in terms of changes for the annual plan. This is the time for you to do that. But other than that, we will bring the changes that once you've obviously adopted your resolutions, we'll bring those changes through into a final version of the annual plan for adoption at the council meeting on the 23rd of June.
Thank you, Alan. Councillor Bryant.
Just one question, if I may, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Just in relation to the Waimea Dam, all the changes around that will be subsequent to this annual plan year, won't they?
There are changes in the annual plan for the cost overruns. So,
but no changes to them, though, is there? There's changes in there.
No, sorry, not since the consultation document.
And obviously there'll be for subsequent years there'll have to be changes, which I think we're considering in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I guess depending on what information comes out from Waimea Water in the future. Yep.
So do you understand it?
Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Are those that have sought funding or will receive funding, are they notified? How are they notified? And those that haven't got what they would have liked, how do they know that?
Alan.
Once the council has adopted the annual plan, we would contact all of those people. I mean, in reality, we contact all submitters to respond to the points that they have made and inform them about the council's decision making process. So yeah, they would get informed as part of that process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Is there anything further? If not, can someone move the resolution now?
I'll move.
Altered by the kind of direction that we provided on the way through. Move Councillor Bryant, seconded Councillor Dowler. Any comments, questions? If not, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing that reflected in the report to us on the 23rd. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, council staff. Thank you for everyone's contribution to the discussion. I will now close with karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa panamu te moana, aroha atu, aroha mai, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you, everybody. Well done.